Hey there, Solar Warriors. I'm Nico Johnson, and this is SunCast. Each week, I pull back the veil on the life and business insights of clean tech entrepreneurs building the most noble and impactful companies of our time. I hope what you learn from this conversation is a catalyst for your own growth. So thanks for tuning in, and welcome to our tribe. Hey, all right, welcome back, Solar Warrior. I'm thrilled that you've chosen to spend this time with me today. You know, time is our most valuable and non-renewable resource. So thank you for your vote of confidence. And today's entrepreneur knows all about the power of voting with your feet. Since 2002, Vote Solar has been working to make solar affordable and accessible to more Americans, supporting the policies and programs needed to repower our grid with clean energy. As executive director of one of the most prominent and influential solar energy advocacy groups in the United States, Adam Browning and Vote Solar have served a critical role in the rollout of successful state solar policies nationwide. Along the way, they've also inspired many an entrepreneur on their own journey, as we heard in Christina Skirka's story last week. Indeed, Adam and his mighty band of solar warriors have helped shape the policy and narrative in battleground states from Tallahassee to Tacoma, served as expert witness and counsel to governments from the Carolinas to Colorado, and virtually all states in between. When I finally got a chance to sit down with Adam at the Podcast Lounge at Long Last in Salt Lake City this past September, I wanted to dig into the origin story, but Adam gave me so much more. Today, you'll learn the 4 pillars of policy successful Vote Solar campaigns lean on, the 5 focus areas that they are leaning into, the hardest won and presently fighting battles in battleground states, Adam's theory of change model, and his 2050 prediction. So get ready to tune up your skills, Solar Warrior, as we tune in to another powerful conversation here on SunCast. Here we are live at the Podcast Lounge, produced by SunCast Media and sponsored by Radiant REIT. We're so grateful to have you present here again today to listen to another series of interviews and programming at Solar Power International 2019. We're going to kick it off with Mr. Adam Browning, the co-founder and executive director of Vote Solar. Vote Solar is well known as an advocacy group that has been instrumental in lifting policy to bring many states forward in the fight to transition to clean energy, notably involved in California and the Carolinas and the Midwest. We're going to talk about all that, but first let me introduce and welcome Mr. Adam Browning to the show.
Pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Adam, you've founded and run a really incredible and inspiring organization, and we're going to talk a lot about the work that you guys are currently doing, but I would love it if you could take us back in time to the moment where it first occurred to you that there was a fight that needed to be fought around clean energy.
Great. So the Vote Solar origin story goes back to really 2001. I was working for the Environmental Protection Agency, doing a lot of enforcement work, and a college buddy, David Hochschild, was working for Mayor Willie Brown, the mayor of San Francisco. And he had this idea, let's put solar, I just put solar in my house, let's put solar on City Hall. And we started looking into it, trying to figure out how we could make this happen. And for me, there was really a penny that dropped as I really started thinking and looking into solar. So much of my work at EPA was about how do you find people that were emitting too much, and how do you use this command and control to stop them from exceeding limits. How about if we just skip the whole smokestack altogether and go directly to a non-emitting technology? And that, for me, was the really compelling moment where I recognized that this was something I really wanted to devote myself to.
VoteSolar.org began as a grassroots campaign to literally vote for the city to fund solar.
So that was the Proposition B campaign of 2001. And so I'd never done anything political before, really, in my life at that time. And I just loved this element of there were so many people that were volunteering, that were excited about being a part of something larger than themselves, that saw this vision of really just not waiting for a utility to do the right thing, but taking control of your own energy future and doing it yourself. We had, armies of folks just flooding all the public transportation BART system with sandwich boards and flyers, and went out to like every civic group's monthly meetings and gave presentations. And there was a real element of like tapping into people's desires to make their own communities better that I'd never that really appealed to me. I'd never really been a part of something like that before. So for me, it was this dual element. One of having already devoted my career to environmental protection and seeing a better way than like just this command and control, this enforcement, and just taking a leap forward where you're not dealing with any pollution at all. And this idea of civic engagement to get there, of not waiting for a utility to do the right thing, and instead taking control of your own future through solar. Solar was unique in terms of like the options that we could look at the time, that you could do it yourself.
Yeah.
So,
and for context, 2001, the average cost of solar.
It was $9 a watt at the time. And, the way that you could make that pencil out was that you would do energy efficiency and have that sort of help subsidize, if you will, the cost of the much higher cost solar. So, that Prop B campaign ended up passing by 74%. It was one of the highest levels of a ballot initiative at that time ever in the city.
Amazing.
And, got New York Times was calling. We had coverage around the country around this, and we had all these cities calling and saying, "How can we do this ourselves? Like, what else? Can we do this too? Can you help us?" So that was when David and I decided to quit our jobs and found a nonprofit organization dedicated first to helping cities go solar themselves. Our premise here really was about, at that point in time, was about how do we, this was a beautiful technology, but it was really expensive. And so how do you actually bring this into the mainstream? And our theory was that you needed to have economies of scale to bring down the costs. We had a analysis from Greenpeace Netherlands that had hired KPMG to look ahead and to analyze at what level of investment would you need, how much economies of scale, how much global demand would you need in order to like bring the cost of solar down to grid parity. And according to that analysis, you wanted to have a solar economy that could sustain 500 megawatts worth of annual demand. So it may have been off a little bit on the numbers, but the premise was spot on, that the way to get to cheap solar was by buying expensive solar. Yeah. And so that was the rationale behind taking on this challenge.
So it's not lost on me that and this is in your early to mid 20s, is that right? Maybe late 20s? I don't want to date you, but I'm just trying to get a sense of how much experience was brought into this.
So, right. No, I was actually just 30 then. So,
okay, fantastic. So how did you and David conceive of funding this venture? You're going to quit your job. You're going to start a nonprofit. Nonprofits don't fund themselves.
Right. So my mother grew up in the old country, and she was flabbergasted. I had a federal job. What, you crazy,
Security,
Adam?
Yeah.
Like, you don't quit federal jobs. Like, that's... So we got an initial grant, $50,000 from the Energy Foundation, and another $50,000 from the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, which was enough to, these were one-year grants, and that was enough to get us started. We leased a corner room from Fenton Communications on 2nd and Howard, and that was how we got our start, was just through this like initial seed investment from Philanthropic.
After Prop B.
So this was right after Prop B passed in November.
And Prop B was just all sweat equity. You're just like, we're going to make this happen. You leaned in. You maybe got some donations from
We
folks
got
that needed to see it
donations for
happen.
like signs
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But yeah, this was an entirely volunteer-led
Your
effort.
side hustle.
No one. This was volunteer. This was fun. This was like evenings and weekends.
What was
So-
David doing? You were working together?
So David at the time was working for Mayor Willie Brown as
Okay.
a special advisor of some sort, he credit him with having like the political experience of understanding how to work within the city supervisor system. And again, like we had two campaigns. That first was getting that on the ballot, and that we needed the city supervisors to vote on. And then secondly, actually running the ballot initiative and getting the whole city voters to do it. And, again, like we had early visionaries on the board of supervisors, and their interest in actually seeing this happen and championing these issues, like that fundamentally changed the course of my life to be able to see how we could make that change happen.
And the lives of many others to follow suit. Do you feel like you had been prepared with the tools you would need after, beyond the grassroots campaigning that you need to do? Did the work you had done in your 20s really set you up to start this nonprofit, or were you guys sort of...
No. In short, I've never had a lifelong game plan of like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
This is who I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
I would just really credit it to an outlook of following one's heart and doing the thing that you are passionate about and enjoy, and keeping open to the next thing. And once this came along, I really, I felt I loved the path, and I was passionate about the goal, and that combination of the two was enough to make me. Give me the confidence to quit a job and launch out into the great unknown. But I'd never really done anything political before. And in terms of solar, neither David nor I really knew. I mean, I remember when Greg Rosen of Powerlight at the time, so Powerlight was the major solar company, explained net metering to me. There were very simple concepts around solar that, when we launched the organization, we didn't know diddly, is what it comes down to.
When I interviewed Bernadette, she gave you and David a ton of credit for work that's been done, from the very beginning, all the way back with SB1 through to the work that is now, getting through the legislature and changing again the way storage is seen as a progressive technology that needs to be backed at a state level. How you mentioned that David had the political acumen. How did you go about preparing yourself, right? As you said, not necessarily a career track mind of this is the path I'm going to take. As you began to evolve, how did your roles start to sift out? David was responsible for this. I was responsible for that.
Whoa, that's a good question. Some ancient history there. So I think, first we had this idea of doing city-led initiatives around the country. And then, from
the very beginning, it was
countrywide. This idea was like, can we do enough city-led initiatives around the country to make this happen? And so I remember there were some folks in Phoenix that were interested in this, and so took kind of the template that we had worked with in California and started to figure out how could we apply this in Arizona. And it quickly became clear, well, you needed net metering to make some of this stuff work. And Arizona did not have a net metering policy. So it was not very long after initially starting the organization that we realized we really needed to think about not how do you catalyze action at the individual or at the city level, but really that the game was about establishing the right state-level policy infrastructure in order to allow a comprehensive market to grow, and that you needed, we called them the four pillars at the time of policy, and a market was only as strong as your weakest link. So at the time we thought about We needed subsidies. We needed incentives. We needed...
These are the 4 pillars.
These are the 4 pillars
Okay.
that we had talked about. So incentives, net metering, interconnection. You needed the ability to interconnect to the grid, and then you needed good rate design so to get fair value for your generation. So
before you continue into, because I'm very interested
Sure.
in how you conceptually moved into this citywide initiative. What you just described is it's easy for us in retrospect to say, oh, these are the 4 pillars. Is that something that evolved over a long period of time? Or was it for you and David and the other contributors to Vote Solar something that catalyzed in a very short period of time? Like, oh, these are the 4 things that we clearly need to do. It's kind of like a mission statement.
It was
for Vote
definitely, so it was, everyone understood we needed a lot of things in order to make it work. And here were a bunch of sticky points that needed to be condensed and simplified and one-pagerized, if you will, in order to like really show policymakers. So this metaphor of the pillars of a stool, you knock one out, everything else falls down, was a compelling one. So we worked then and now quite a bit with industry. So this was trying to best understand what from industry's perspective.
Yeah. And
And then again, this was Power Light days. There weren't Astro Power was one of the big manufacturers. BP Solar was this is when I first met Jigger Shaw back in the day.
There weren't 700 exhibitors at SPI because it didn't exist yet.
I feel like the first SPI I attended was in some dingy ballroom in Reno. Way back when. So yes, there were the seeds of the understanding of the problem. What we needed to do was really internalize them, understand them, make it very simple for policymakers to know what success looks like.
And to reiterate, because if you listen to, for example, the episode that we did with Bernadette and even the episode with Julia, we talk a lot about how important it is to have a clean, concise message, because you only get a certain amount of bandwidth of policymakers, and they have to be pseudo experts on many different things, and their aides help them oftentimes come up to speed on the relevant points and how they're going to align on their ticket or not. I think that it's remarkable that your 4 pillars of subsidies, net metering, interconnection, and good rate design, to this day, 17 years later, are in fact the message that our industry fights in every state we go to.
With the exception, I think, of the incentives, subsidies.
Right.
So we don't, catalytic in this whole industry and the conversation was the, California Solar Roofs Initiative that so many people work so hard on. But the whole idea was like, how do you incentivize an industry to grow to a point where it doesn't need it anymore?
Yeah.
And that was necessary then. We did a lot of that policy around the country, but that's not something that we... that is a major part of the conversation in most places in the U.S. right now.
Has something else supplanted incentives in the stool as a pillar?
So, it depends on what you're solving for here, right? So, at the time, really, this was mostly a rooftop market.
Yeah.
And now we see such diversity into the, you've got rooftop solar, you've got utility scale solar on the wholesale side. And then in the middle, you've got community solar, the idea that we need to ensure the ability to have access to participation and choice for everybody.
Solar for all,
And so as the industry has evolved, as the landscape has evolved, our policy priorities and our policy prescriptions have evolved as well. So, right now, the work that we do at Vote Solar, there are definitely through lines all the way through. I would have never have imagined that, I would have spent the bulk of my 30s and 40s on net metering, but here we are. But we've also we do a ton of work that goes well beyond those initial efforts that we had on how to catalyze. So the first question that we had was how do you make solar cheap? And that was the first 10 years of our effort.
And that was led by the incentive and net metering.
And that was what we were solving for. It's how do you build the economies of scale in order to get to a market where you don't need new incentives, where it is a standalone, low-cost energy source. Mission accomplished, right? Globally, mission accomplished.
Where were you in this process And how did your perspective, philosophy on the evolution of Vote Solar evolve when you saw the catalytic change and precipitous drop of, for example, solar panel manufacturing costs in the late 2000s, early to teens?
There was a point in time when I thought I was going to work myself out of a job, right?
Yeah.
Like you get to a point where it's economically compelling and
Yeah.
done deal, right? Like all the market forces will just take over and no need for any new advocacy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that, as we all well know, that isn't the case. That hasn't proved to be. It was necessary but not sufficient to get to this low-cost solar. So we're up against, again, an entrenched industry that has economic interests in fossil fuels, and they fight dirty to keep the dirty. And so we unfortunately still have a really compelling need to do advocacy around the country. But we're solving for a different issue. We're solving for how do we get this low-cost energy source utilized, implemented as quickly as possible, and how do you run a grid on variable renewables? And that adds a ton of other policy priorities and prerogatives and a lot more complexity to our work. So our organization has continuously evolved. We're always taking the temperature of like what's needed, what's needed now, and looking around a corner, like what do we need to prepare for what's coming down the pike.
Are you most often called into a state, or is your team strategically targeting states that need advocacy, that need action? How does that symbiosis with the state organizations work?
Yeah, it's a
and perhaps it's worth discussing what your current, 2019 corporate structure looks like, how you deploy resources now. Obviously, you've grown a lot.
Sure. So, many years it was, David and I, and then me and JP and Gwen. JP, a lot of these colleagues are now here at SBI. Gwen's over at Sunfolding. JP is at East Bay Community Energy. And David is now an energy commissioner in California, which is super awesome. So, small digression just to say that it's so nice to just see that there are so many people involved in the beginning of these fights from Vote Solar as well as on the industry partnership side that are from the beginning and are still fighting the good fight from different venues.
Must be very gratifying.
We have gradually grown over the years, and we're now about 30 people in 11 different offices around the country.
11 offices.
Sometimes that office is a spare bedroom in someone's house.
Fair
but
enough.
We write a lot of checks to WeWork around the country, which has been quite helpful to us. And headquartered in Oakland, California.
Fantastic.
So right now we've got 5 different program areas: rooftop solar, community solar, utility scale solar. So we look at these major different market segments and sectors and think about like what policy is needed in order to deploy all of these. Then we have our grid modernization program, which is really about how do we do the proactive work right now in order to ensure that we can run a reliable grid on these variable resources. And so there's some technology deployment that's needed, and a lot of it is really around operational change. It can be done. It just needs good policy to change the way that we think about running the grid. And then finally, access and equity. We are really determined that as solar industry grows, that we really think about and pay attention to building a more equitable world. And I think that this is crucial to our fight in several different ways. One is that, if the solar industry is going to grow to, Abby set a goal of 20% of the energy supply over the next 10 years. Our Vote Solar's goal is 50% by 2050. We can't get there without everybody seeing how they can participate in and benefit from this transition. We need to have a vision and back that vision up with action that is really a big tent. Secondly, as we make this transformation, we have a wonderful opportunity to make a more just world, and I'm determined that all of the teams determined that we don't want to pass this opportunity up. So those are the 5 different program areas that we work on, and our staff structure has definitely evolved, and the type of people that we bring on board has definitely evolved to meet those challenges.
I've always thought that commercial solar should have an easy button for financing, just like residential solar. But credit ultimately has been the gating item until now. Energetic Insurance levels the playing field so that project developers can now offer the same electricity savings to small and medium businesses that were previously reserved for the large commercial buyers in the U.S. Their Enerate credit cover policy provides the missing link, or that easy button I mentioned earlier. For commercial solar, it's basically the FICO score that we're so familiar with in residential solar. And it enables savvy developers and investors to quickly finance commercial solar projects. Don't take my word for it. Check it out for yourself. Go to energeticinsurance.com/Suncast and submit your projects today. What do you got to lose? 70% of projects qualify, and the review process is drop dead easy. Go hit the easy button on commercial solar at energeticinsurance.com/Suncast. Hey, are you losing commercial solar sales because of high demand charges that minimize the ROI for your customer? Extensible Energy's Demand X software is an affordable new solution for reducing peak demand charges by 30%. No batteries required. Extensible's intelligent software analyzes solar production, utility rates, weather data, and more. Then it crunches that data, monitors solar and flexible loads, and automatically reduces peak demand spikes, increasing your customer's ROI and decreasing payback time. Head to extensibleenergy.com/Suncast for a free demand charge analysis for your project and to learn more about Extensible's partner program for commercial solar installers. You can learn more at extensibleenergy.com/Suncast. And finally, a quick reminder on how you can get more out of SunCast this week. Number 1, I'll be giving away 1 membership to our Insiders circle of tribe members we call the SunCast Guild. There's only 2 ways to get an entry. You could join the SunCast tribe mailing list, or you could take the listener survey. Either way, both are an easy way to get an entry. You can find it at mysuncast.com. And thing number 2 is I'm giving away free 30-minute clarity coaching for everyone who fills out a coaching application. This is a $150 value, so I do hope you won't sleep on this offer. Coaching applications close on Sunday, December 15th. Just click on the Work With Me button at mysuncast.com and fill out an application. All right, let's get back to today's conversation.
I kind of look at what you guys do as continual campaigning, right? Like presidential campaigns every 4 years, and now it's almost perpetual. The work that you're involved in is essentially not presidential, but essentially an ongoing, never-ending campaign, right? So in the same sense as presidential campaigns or senatorial campaigns even have like battleground states or battleground topics, I'd love to hear from you in 2019 and 2020 what for Vote Solar represents kind of battleground states. Where are you really entrenched in trying to help create the advocacy that's necessary to lift that state, that community up to achieve access equity, not inequity, to achieve grid modernization, to elevate community solar to the masses?
Great question. Let me get to that. Let me first start with just sort of our theory of change, how we work.
Perfect.
So we've got principally we've got a campaigns team and we've got a regulatory team. So some of the work we do is legislative. The majority of the work we do is regulatory in front of public utility or public service commissions. And so
sorry, campaigns and
we got the regulatory team, and then supporting that we have our communications and our development, but you know the bulk of the focal point, we think about this as sort of a campaign side and a regulatory side. So the regulatory team, deep wonks. These are the expert witnesses that get involved in these complex regulatory filings in front of a public service or public utility commission, where you're making your case with numbers. You're building these Excel spreadsheets that dim the lights of a minor city when you run them, and you're analyzing the utilities bullshit, and you're making your case that do this, don't do that. Crucial that you get involved at that level. These are quasi-legalistic proceedings. You have to have a lawyer. We partner with Earth Justice and a lot of other regional legal counsel in order to intervene in these proceedings. You make your case with analysis, numbers, math, but you never win just because you're right? So we've got the campaigns team, and the challenge there is how do you align the politics around the outcome that you want to see in any particular proceeding. And so there we think about these campaigns in a site-specific context. All right, who's making these decisions? Power map it out. Who do they listen to? And what do they need to hear in order to line up behind this outcome? So who do we need to partner with? And think about it in that way. So that sort of in a nutshell is our secret sauce. Our theory of change is combining that deep level wonkery, deep level analytic work with really strong state and local specific campaigns that, again, crystallize the message in a very compelling way for policymakers, elected or appointed, all operate in a political context, and you have to make the outcome that you want to see the one that is going to be the most compelling for them. And that can be that requires a lot of different skill sets. There's a lot of left brain, right brain going on here in our org as a through line. So your initial question is like, what are the battleground states? Where do we work? And so it's funny, as I was walking over from the hotel here, I just started chatting to the guy who's on the sidewalk next to me, and it happened to be Representative John Zoka of North Carolina.
What?
And so it was him and his wife, and we got to talking about some of the legislation that he had championed, and how upset he is that as it's being implemented, he feels like he had an understanding with Duke, and it's not being implemented the way that he felt that there was an understanding for. And so,
I'm glad that you started with North Carolina. I was going to ask you to unpack the Duke intervening and how that process works.
So our theory here is that, the passage of a major piece of legislation marks the beginning of your work, not the end of the work. You need to really follow this all the way through. So we do like to focus on, we don't just hang out for the headlines. We follow this all the way through so that you actually get the implementation, so that you help real people in real places. It actually, this isn't an academic exercise for us. So there's a bunch of different states around that we can talk about that were really, they are your bedrock, bulwark, major solar markets. And it's crucial that we keep those alive and going. Then, it is a resource question. We can't be everywhere. We are always making really difficult decisions about, we want to go deep and win. We don't want to have a toe in the water everywhere and not actually get anything done. So there are a bunch of other places where we decide there isn't a market, but there should be. We want to really build something new here. And that's, not the rest of the country. We pick our spots and try to grow with partners good outcomes. So we will always stay involved in California. It is the most important solar market in the country. Wonderful working with Bernadette and CalSA, and we each take different elements of that of the policy fight on in that state. But crucial that market continues to flower, continues to grow, and continues to pave the way for other states, show what is actually possible. So, Hawaii passed the first 100% bill. California was second, and that, when you have, the fifth largest economy of the world, passing legislation of that import, this idea that, you can't do it goes by the wayside. So, what happens in California is crucially important. So we want to make sure that continues to thrive, continues to grow, continues to set new standards for what is possible in terms of, as well as policy innovation. And so we could talk forever about that.
Yeah.
But this, it's a huge country, and it can't be a California-only phenomenon, obviously. So, New York is a critical market. Massachusetts is a critical market. Midwest, I couldn't be more excited about what's going on in the Midwest right now. And we're really growing our Chicago office. Mm-hmm. So our principal focus there, is Illinois, Michigan, and Minnesota. But, got a soft spot for Wisconsin. There's a ton of other things that are really growing on there that are really good. The Southeast, so we initially went down there. The Turner Foundation asked us to see what might be possible in Georgia, and we spent Hannah Muller-Mastrian, and now Hannah Muller was with us at the time. She's now working for Clearway, but she piloted and pioneered a policy roadmap that we worked on in Georgia, and I considered a shining example of real fast growth in the country.
Georgia.
So the Carolinas are also crucial to this fight. So we work now in about 26 different states around the country, some of which are more involved in a rate case or a PURPA proceeding, and some of which are like full wraparound every issue under the sun that we take on.
So I have a million questions I could ask you. There's two things that I want to be strategic about, and then I want to move into a different segment of the show. The first is, is it easy? And to the extent that it is, could you explain a little bit about the North Carolina as a battleground, in particular with Duke? You guys recently published some documentation where you were expert witnesses intervening with Duke. Duke's got a long battle in the state trying to sort of protect their own interests. What does that fight look like, and how does that inform the rest of the nation of the battle that we're currently engaged in?
Yeah, so North Carolina is compelling in a lot of different ways, and one of which is Duke, right? Mm-hmm. So largest utility in the country, and important, in and of itself for that. And they operate in a bunch of different states around the country. And so, first seeing, North Carolina was principally a PURPA-driven market. Mm-hmm. This was, it was a federal law that said, if your clean resource is cheaper than the dirty, you got to buy the clean. That really catalyzed so much growth with a lot of awesome solar developers down there. That has now since been revised by some of the legislation, and there's been a lot of change in the market there going forward. But I think this really comes down to a question. Much of the Southeast is, you have really strong utilities. You're a vertically integrated market, and utilities really have traditionally held incredible influence over the legislature and the Public Service Commission, more so than a lot of other areas of the country. Yep. So I think a lot of the changes that we're seeing right now in the state really have come from accountability from regulators and legislators who have looked at this business model and understood that it is not always in the best interest of ratepayers. Just because the utility says it doesn't mean that it's right. So you take Duke's last effort on, they called it grid modernization, Power Forward, $13.8 billion, mostly for undergrounding transmission lines. And they were selling this as crucial for growing renewable energy.
Right.
There was no constituency in that state that wanted to see it besides Duke. Walmart, Google, all the consumer advocates were, you would have had fixed charges on utility bills going up to $40-$50 a month before you bought a single kilowatt hour of electricity. And that wasn't good for any of these consumers. Yeah. So we worked with a lot of the local partners who were expert witnesses on that intervention with NCSEA and others. And so I think it was, Duke lost on that. They weren't allowed to just spend that money. they continuously come back. They've tried to get a 221% fixed charge increase on residential rates. And one of the commissioners, when they published that decision refusing that, called out, he's like, this is such a bad idea.
Yeah.
Bad for poor people, bad for the elderly, bad for solar, bad for energy efficiency, and so clearly bad, I can't believe that you've proposed it. And so I'm going to knock down your return on equity about a point. I'm going to disallow cost recovery for CEO Lynn Good's salary, 75% of that, and 50% of the next 3 highest paid people at Duke. Sending a message of like,
very punitive.
It's accountable. It's accountability. It's like you actually need to rethink how, your business model isn't just to maximize your profits. It's to deliver a public good and a public service, and really putting the public back in the Public Service Commission.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
This was back this spring. Now you see Duke on one hand, they've just announced these major 2050 carbon goals. At the same time, they want to build in their IRP 12 gigawatts of new fossil-fueled fracked gas plants. So you've got a situation here where I really think the utility business model of being paid for capital deployment is really called into question.
Yeah.
And so this is a long, wonky discursion on the idea that ultimately solar is the pointy edge of the spear that is challenging the way that power is delivered in this country. And I really do think that the end game will be a new utility business model and a new relationship between consumers and electricity providers.
I love that answer. It was really fascinating. And I'm sorry if it did get wonky for anyone listening who maybe is more interested in Florida, which would take a whole other podcast session. And if you do have any comments, I know that you guys, Florida is a deep battleground state for you guys because it's the Sunshine State and it should be moving forward, and we've seen wins and losses there.
Yep.
But in the same vein, I would love to know if you would bring us up to speed. What is happening in California? As you said before, as go California, so goes the world in many ways. What do you see transpiring in California that not only Vote Solar but other advocacy agencies are carrying into Capitol Hill? They're saying at every state house, here are the things that are coming down the pike.
Right. So a couple of challenges in California, many challenges in California, but let me just lay out one here. So we've now got this goal of 100% clean energy. 60% has to be renewable. The next 40 clean, carbon-free.
Yep.
Details to be worked out at the commission. Our theory here is that not 100% is crucial for climate, but how you get there really matters. And we have a people-centric, a customer-centric vision of a really participatory model that I think is both crucial for the continued sort of political viability of interest in solar, as well as how you solve for grid modernization, for grid integration of these high levels of renewables. And what I mean by this is you really need to focus on all the ways that you, as a consumer, can have your beneficial activities valued and compensated, particularly as we look at this next challenge of integrating these large amounts of solar. So let me give you an example of something that I think California has begun to do and really will should be an example for a lot more of the country as well. So a big part of this future is like we've got a ton of solar on the grid in the middle afternoons, and how do you best integrate it? So the California now has these community choice aggregators, so local governments that are doing the procurement and implementing innovative new programs instead of the investor-owned utilities. And so mine in Oakland, the East Bay Community Energy, just signed a contract with Sunrun to do solar plus storage on low-income housing. That storage on the low-income housing will mostly be used under time of use rates to benefit the low-income housing residents. But as an additional revenue stream for to support the cost of that installation, they've signed a contract with EBCE to participate in CAISO's demand response proxy program. So when there is a grid strain, when there is not enough supply on the grid and you actually need to really shift the load, those batteries will be deployed to solve for grid problems. So here we've got a situation where you're partnering with with low-income residents, and they're getting the benefit of solar plus storage. The community gets the benefit of more resiliency of having storage inside of those distribution networks, and you're partnering to change your load, in essence, with your local utility to solve grid-wide problems.
Right.
So I think that is a vision of local participation, of individual participation, using a full suite of different technologies, solar plus storage, in essence being a demand response program. It's really a paradigm. It's a proxy for a lot of what we would like to see around the future.
Yeah, and it's leveraging the type of financial engineering and creative financing, harvesting the value stacking of different energy streams that we've seen, not even that Sunrun first did in the Northeast, right? That now we're able to bring to this innovation to low income, back to energy equity.
Nail on the head.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. Well put.
It's great to see, and thank you for that example. Let's see, check on time here. We've got about 5 more minutes.
Let's do it.
I wanted to dig in a little bit on the personal side.
Sure.
Where you've been doing this. You've had a number of folks come through Vote Solar, and you've been the standard bearer, the flag bearer, if you will. What inspires you to keep this fight going for nearly 2 decades now?
It's a great question. I have to say, I mean, a big part of it is just, what else would you rather be working on? I really view this as the most significant challenge that our world, not just our state or our country, faces, combating climate change and building a new clean energy future. And then it is just such a lovely community. So you are very kind to call me the flag bearer, but I don't get to do any of the fun stuff anymore.
Yeah.
We have an awesome team at Vote Solar of so many creative, smart, vibrant, dedicated leaders. That it's really just about getting to work with them as they work around the country. And walking around SPI is such a joy. I just you see so many people that have also dedicated their lives to this transformation. It is just it's a wonderful industry that we all work in.
So, as back to the original question, in your 20s, you guys had to figure out how to fund this. And in a typical corporate startup structure, the CEO is the guy that's out mostly raising money, Series A, Series B, trying to bring in capital to keep feeding the beast, as it were. Do you find that that's where you spend a lot of your time these days, really trying to figure out the funding mechanisms that keep it alive and push it forward?
That is unfortunately exactly the case. I do end up doing a lot of the fundraising. And so, over my career, I've probably raised and deployed collectively with the team, over $50 million worth of policy advocacy focused on this particular transformation. And the bulk of that really does come from philanthropy, comes from foundations. But crucially, we throw up 2 parties every year, one in DC and one in San Francisco, called Equinox, which is the opportunity to gather together in community with our environmental activist friends and with our industry partners. That is the opportunity for industry to help support these efforts, to bring in the money that goes right out the door to creating markets so that we can all thrive. So,
and it's an absolutely enjoyable way to do it, by the way. And the Equinox parties are almost, without parallel.
They are awesome parties as well. So, thanks for the opportunity to give a plug. We do really do crucially depend upon and really appreciate the financial support of the broader community.
So for those who are listening, maybe they're sitting here, maybe they're listening afterwards on SunCast or on LinkedIn or somewhere else. If someone wanted to personally contribute, or apart from going to the parties, which is a great way to share in that advocacy and the lift, where would they find out more about Vote Solar? How could they contribute from their personal treasure?
Right on. So votesolar.org is the URL for that. And yeah, that is your entry point really to get involved in advocacy that affects your state, your locality. We partner with all of our members as activists, and that is a crucial part of our
So it's part of
theory of change.
it's possible to become a member of
You
Vote
sign
Solar?
on, put your name, zip code, and then we get you involved in the policy fights that most impact you. And then if you are so moved to contribute as well, that support, that partnership is gratefully accepted, and you can do that online as well.
So I know that you're active on Twitter. You're far more active than I am, and you're at Adam Browning. Is there another Twitter handle as well?
I mean,
Adam
at
underscore, right?
Sure. No, it's Adam Browning direct,
okay.
but Vote Solar is the main one. That's just which I don't get to.
All one word at Vote. You don't get to tweet.
I don't.
They
I
took
don't
the
run
reins
that
away?
one. Exactly.
Yeah.
People far better at it than I run that now. But yeah, votesolar.org. So votesolar.org is the URL, at Vote Solar, Facebook page as well.
Okay.
A lot of ways of interacting with us.
Yeah, and are you pretty active on LinkedIn as well? If folks ping you and want to reach out. Yes or no?
No.
That's a fair answer.
You can,
I know that you're active on
so,
Twitter. That's how we've communicated a number of times. Well, let's wrap this up for today with one final question, and I call this the bold prediction. Adam Browning, what one thing do you see happening in the market that maybe nobody else is tracking? What do you have in your crystal ball for 2020?
For 2020, so I do think one of the most significant and impactful phenomenon that's happening right now is this transition to locking in at the state level a clean energy future. And, of the 6 states that have passed this legislation, 5 of them have been in the last 13 months. And, this is just beginning right now. So I think over the next several years, we're going to get a bunch more of those states that make it mandatory law that we dial in this clean energy outcome. And then a ton of work as to how do we implement this equitably? How do we make sure that everybody participates and benefits from this transition to the renewable energy economy will be an increasing focus of our work, and really excited to see where that goes.
So in 2019, we saw the count go over 100 cities, counties, and municipalities committing to 100%. Where do you think that's going to be in 2020? You care to put a flag in the sand?
In terms of that, I would have no idea. I think that's having cities commit to that is a wonderful demonstration of the constituency that needs to be served for it, but you really need state level policy to make that true. And love the work of all the activists that sign cities up. That needs to be transformed into state level law. Yeah.
This has been a really fun discussion. Such an honor to have Adam Browning, one of the co-founders and the CEO of Vote Solar. Is it CEO or president? Make sure.
Call it executive director.
But, Vote Solar. Check out what Vote Solar is doing at votesolar.org. Of course, go find them on LinkedIn and Facebook. We'll link to that in the show notes afterwards. Thank you for joining us at the Podcast Lounge here at Solar Power International 2019.
My pleasure. Thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you.
Hey, you're still here. I love the super dedicated outro listeners. You never stop learning. Well, you, my fellow Philomath, can find the resources and highlights from this and every discussion, along with the social media links, book recommendations, and more on the blog at mysuncast.com. I recently added a big button to the homepage that'll take you straight there. And since I know you're here listening to the closing credits, I know you're dedicated to improving yourself personally and professionally. Well, here at SunCast, I'm also committed to the continual improvement of the show. So while you're on the website, I'd love it if you would take 2 more minutes and give me your feedback in our first ever listener survey. I read each and every one of these, anonymous or not. Take the survey at mysuncast.com. And as a thank you, I'll be drawing at random among both survey entries and SunCast Tribe email subscribers to gift 1 year of membership to the SunCast Guild, our inner circle of SunCast listeners. In this program, we're going to be doing some much weighted upgrades in the coming year. If you're unfamiliar with the SunCast Guild, you can learn more at mysuncast.com/member. There's a rather old video there, but it serves the purpose nonetheless. Both a survey entry and an email subscription enter you into the drawing. And finally, as we head into the new decade, I can't believe it, it's almost 2020, I'd like to invite those who are planning and thinking ahead to think on how you might make 2020 and the next 10 years the most impactful of your life. I'm giving a free 30-minute clarity coaching for anyone who fills out a coaching application. This is a $150 value, so I do hope that you won't sleep on that offer. Coaching applications close on Sunday, December 15th. You can click on the Work With Me button at mysuncast.com and fill out the application. And apart from these clarity calls, I'll only be taking on 3 new clients. So if you apply and don't make these 3 slots, then I'll certainly put you on the waiting list. And thanks again to our sponsors who help make this podcast possible, Energetic Insurance and Extensible Energy. You can learn more about both as well as our past sponsors at mysuncast.com/sponsor. Remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.